November 8, 1942. The coastal plain near Oran, Algeria. Lieutenant Marco Rossi of the Italian Bersaglieri crouched behind a shattered concrete wall as tracer rounds carved luminous arcs through the pre-dawn darkness. The sound was unlike anything he had experienced in 2 years of desert warfare. Not the measured crack of rifle fire or the stuttering bark of the Breda machine guns his men carried. This was something else entirely. A continuous, mechanical roar that seemed to tear the very air apart. Beside him, Sergeant Piero Conti pressed his body flat against the rubble, his Breda Modello 30 lying useless where he had dropped it after the magazine jammed for the 3rd time that night. When the firing finally ceased, the silence felt almost physical. 23 men from Rossi's platoon were dead or wounded. The American positions 200 meters ahead remained intact. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. What Lieutenant Rossi did not know in that moment of defeated silence was that his unit had just encountered a weapon system that represented not merely a technological advantage, but a fundamental demonstration of the industrial chasm separating Italian and American war-making capacity. The weapons that had devastated his platoon were M2 Browning heavy machine guns, firing the .50 caliber cartridge at rates and with reliability that Italian military planners had believed theoretically possible but practically unachievable. Within hours, as American forces consolidated their positions following Operation Torch, Italian and German units would capture several of these weapons intact. What Italian ordnance officers discovered when they examined these captured M2s would fundamentally alter their understanding of the war they were fighting. The psychological impact of this revelation would prove almost as significant as the tactical reality the weapons represented. The story of why the M2 Browning represented such a shock to Italian forces begins not in North Africa, but in the fundamental differences between American and Italian approaches to industrial warfare. By November 1942, the Italian military had been fighting for over 2 years with equipment designed and manufactured under constraints that would have been unthinkable to American planners. To understand what Italian soldiers faced when they encountered American machine guns, one must first understand what they carried themselves. The Breda Modello 30 light machine gun, standard issue for Italian infantry squads, represented Italian industry's best attempt to provide automatic fire support under severe material and manufacturing constraints. Adopted in 1930, the weapon was fed from a fixed 20-round magazine attached to the receiver by a hinge pin. The magazine could not be removed in the field. It was reloaded using special 20-round stripper clips, a process that required approximately 15 to 20 seconds with a trained crew. The cyclic rate of fire was approximately 500 rounds per minute in theory, but in practice, accounting for the reloading process and the weapon's tendency to jam, actual sustained fire rates rarely exceeded 150 to 200 rounds per minute. The design incorporated an internal oiling system that sprayed lubricant on each cartridge as it entered the chamber, intended to facilitate extraction. In the dust and sand of North Africa, this system became a catastrophic liability. The oil attracted grit and debris into the action, causing frequent malfunctions. The magazine featured a large viewing window to allow the gunner to see remaining ammunition, which similarly admitted sand and dust directly into the feeding mechanism. The weapon fired from a closed bolt, making it prone to cook-offs, where heat from sustained fire would ignite chambered rounds without the trigger being pulled. The barrel change procedure was cumbersome, and the replacement barrel would require re-zeroing of sights, something rarely practical in combat. When all these factors combined under battlefield conditions, the Breda Modello 30's practical rate of fire could approach that of a semi-automatic rifle, like the American Monet Garand. The Breda Modello 37 medium machine gun, Italy's heavier support weapon, performed better but still reflected fundamental constraints. Chambered for the 8 by 59 mm Breda cartridge, different from standard Italian rifle ammunition, it created supply complications. The weapon fed from metal strip clips rather than belts, each clip holding 20 rounds. After firing, the strip was retained by the weapon and had to be manually removed before a new strip could be inserted. This feeding system, similar to those on obsolete French Hotchkiss designs from before World War I, limited the practical rate of fire to approximately 200 rounds per minute, despite a theoretical cyclic rate of 460 rounds per minute. The weapon with its tripod weighed approximately 43 pounds, making it one of the heaviest machine guns employed during the war. Yet, despite this weight, it could not match the sustained fire capability of lighter German or American weapons. Italian forces also employed captured British weapons when available, particularly the Bren gun, which Italian soldiers generally preferred to their issue weapons. This preference for enemy equipment over domestic production spoke volumes about the reliability issues Italian infantry faced. By November 1942, Italian ordnance officers were acutely aware their weapons were inferior to those of their enemies. What they did not fully appreciate was the extent of the gap, particularly regarding American weapons they had not yet encountered in significant numbers. The M2 Browning machine gun represented the culmination of over 2 decades of American machine gun development and industrial refinement. Designed by John Moses Browning near the end of World War I, the weapon fired the .50 BMG cartridge, one of the most powerful machine gun rounds ever fielded. The projectile weighed between 620 and 710 grains depending on type, compared to 150 grains for the standard American .306 rifle cartridge. Muzzle energy exceeded 13,000 foot-pounds, more than 6 times that of rifle ammunition. The M2 heavy barrel variant, standardized in 1938, weighed 84 pounds for the receiver group. With the 44-pound tripod, total system weight reached 128 pounds. This required crew transport and operation. However, once emplaced, the weapon's performance was extraordinary. The cyclic rate ranged from 450 to 575 rounds per minute. Unlike Italian weapons, this rate could be sustained. The air-cooled barrel required changing after approximately 500 to 800 rounds of continuous fire, a procedure that took approximately 30 seconds with a trained crew. The weapon used a belt feed system accepting either cloth or metal link belts. Standard belts contained 250 rounds, though multiple belts could be linked for continuous fire. Maximum effective range exceeded 2,000 meters. At typical North African combat ranges of 200 to 400 meters, accuracy was devastating. The .50 BMG ammunition came in several variants. Ball rounds could penetrate 0.75 inches of armor steel at 547 yards. Armor-piercing rounds with tungsten carbide cores could penetrate 0.875 inches of hardened steel at 200 yards. Against infantry, the massive kinetic energy produced wounds that were invariably fatal. Near misses could cause injury through hydrostatic shock alone. Against fortifications, the weapon could penetrate sandbag walls, coconut log bunkers, and light vehicle armor that stopped rifle fire. What made the M2 truly revolutionary was not any single specification, but the integration of reliability, sustained fire capability, range, and hitting power in a weapon system designed specifically for mass production. Every part met precise specifications, with tolerances, allowing rapid manufacturing using standard machine tools. This meant American industry could produce these weapons in quantities Italian planners would have considered fantastical. By December 1941, before Pearl Harbor, American arsenals contained tens of thousands of M2 machine guns. Rock Island Arsenal in Illinois had been producing them steadily since the 1920s. After Pearl Harbor, production transformed from steady to overwhelming. Companies that had never manufactured firearms were contracted to produce machine guns. General Motors, Saginaw Steering Gear Division, Buffalo Arms Corporation, and Frigidaire all produced M2 variants. By 1943, monthly American production of M2 machine guns exceeded what Italian industry could manufacture in a year. The weapons that equipped American forces landing in North Africa during Operation Torch represented only a small fraction of total production capacity. For every M2 deployed with American forces, dozens more were being manufactured, along with millions of rounds of ammunition. Italian forces operating in North Africa had learned through bitter experience the limitations of their equipment. The British Vickers and Bren guns had proven superior in sustained firefights. German MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns offered rates of fire and reliability Italian weapons could not match. But Italian soldiers had adapted their tactics to work within these limitations. Careful fire, discipline, good positioning, and aggressive maneuver could sometimes compensate for technical inferiority. This adaptation had created a dangerous illusion among some Italian commanders. If Italian soldiers could hold their own against British forces despite equipment disadvantages, perhaps the material gap was not insurmountable. Perhaps courage and tactical skill could bridge the industrial divide. The American landings in North Africa would shatter this illusion completely. The weapons American forces brought ashore represented industrial capacity operating at a scale Italian planners literally could not comprehend. November 8, 1942. Operation Torch, the Allied amphibious assault on French North Africa, commenced before dawn. American forces landed at 3 locations. In Morocco, Western Task Force targeted Casablanca. In Algeria, Centre Task Force landed near Oran, and Eastern Task Force near Algiers. The initial opposition came from Vichy French forces, who resisted the landings for 3 days before local commanders agreed to a ceasefire. Italian intelligence had predicted possible Allied action in North Africa, but the scale and locations of the landings surprised Axis command. Small numbers of Italian troops were present in French North Africa, primarily liaison personnel and advisors. As Vichy resistance collapsed and French forces joined the Allies, Axis forces began rapid deployment into Tunisia to prevent complete Allied control of North Africa. German and Italian units moved by sea and air from Sicily and southern Italy, establishing defensive positions in northern Tunisia. By late November, approximately 25,000 Axis troops, including Italian divisions, held the approaches to Tunis and Bizerte. The fighting that followed through December and into 1943 saw Italian forces encounter American equipment and tactics for the first time. The contrast with what they had experienced fighting the British proved stark. American forces brought not just different weapons, but fundamentally different approaches to firepower and logistics. Every American infantry company had a weapons platoon with 3 M1919 Browning machine guns and 3 60mm mortars. Every rifle platoon had 1 M1919. Battalion weapons companies had 8 more M1919s, 6 81mm mortars, and multiple M2 heavy machine guns. This represented automatic weapons density far exceeding anything Italian units possessed. More importantly, American ammunition supply seemed unlimited. Italian machine gun crews had learned to husband ammunition carefully, knowing resupply was uncertain. American crews fired continuous bursts that Italian soldiers initially mistook for multiple weapons firing simultaneously. The M2 heavy machine guns, employed at company and battalion level, created particular shock among Italian troops who encountered them. The psychological effect of the weapon's distinctive sound, the crack of supersonic projectiles passing overhead, and the impacts on cover that had stopped rifle fire proved devastating to morale. In engagements during late November and December 1942, Italian positions that had successfully defended against rifle and light machine gun fire found themselves unable to withstand M2 fire. The .50 caliber rounds defeated cover Italian troops had considered adequate. Sandbag walls that stopped rifle fire disintegrated under sustained M2 fire. Stone walls crumbled. Light vehicles were disabled. The effective range of the weapon meant Italian machine gun crews attempting to suppress American positions found themselves under accurate fire from distances their weapons could not match. December 17, 1942. Near Mejez El Bab, Tunisia. Elements of the Italian Superga division engaged American forces attempting to advance toward Tunis. Captain Alessandro Marino commanded a heavy weapons company equipped with 3 Breda Modello 37 machine guns. His defensive position overlooked the road from Mejez, with carefully prepared fields of fire. When American reconnaissance elements appeared, Marino's crews opened fire at approximately 800 meters. The Breda 37s performed adequately at this range, forcing the American vehicles to withdraw. Marino felt confident his position was strong. Then the American heavy weapons arrived. Within minutes, M2 machine guns established firing positions at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. The sound was immediately distinctive, not the comparatively slow rhythm of Italian or even German machine guns, but a faster, harder roar. Tracers arced toward Marino's positions. The first burst struck the sandbag parapet, protecting one of his machine gun positions. The .50 rounds did not merely penetrate the sandbags. They tore them apart, showering the crew with sand and shredded fabric. The second burst killed the gun crew. Within 20 minutes, all three of Marino's machine guns were disabled, or their crews casualties. The American guns never stopped firing. The volume of fire seemed impossible to sustain, yet it continued. Marino's surviving men abandoned their positions, falling back through secondary defensive lines. That evening, Marino spoke with his regimental commander, Colonel Tommaso Bianchi. Bianchi had been a machine gun officer in World War I and understood automatic weapons. He listened to Marino's description, then asked specific questions about the American weapon's sound, firing pattern, and effects. When Marino finished, Bianchi was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something Marino would remember for the rest of his life. "These are not weapons we can match. Our industry cannot build machines like this, not in the quantities required, not with the reliability necessary. We are not fighting an army, we are fighting an industrial system, and that system is consuming us." Within weeks, Italian forces would capture several American vehicles intact, including half-tracks mounting M2 machine guns. German and Italian ordnance teams jointly examined these weapons. What they found confirmed Bianchi's assessment in ways that proved profoundly demoralizing. The examination of captured American M2 Browning machine guns by Italian ordnance officers in January 1943 revealed technical realities that fundamentally challenged Italian understanding of industrial warfare. The first captured M2 arrived at the Italian Ordnance Depot near Tunis on January 12, 1943. It had been removed from a damaged American half-track near Taborba. Major Giuseppe Romano, chief ordnance officer for Italian forces in Tunisia, personally supervised the initial inspection. Romano had extensive experience with machine gun design and production. He had visited Breda factories, consulted on modifications to Italian weapons, and studied captured British and German equipment. He considered himself well informed about contemporary machine gun technology. His examination of the M2 would prove humbling. The weapon was removed from its mount and transported to a secured maintenance facility. Romano's technical team spent 3 days conducting a complete disassembly and analysis. Their findings were documented in a detailed report that Romano forwarded through channels to Rome. The report's tone shifted from technical description to something approaching dismay as the implications became clear. The M2's construction demonstrated manufacturing sophistication Italian industry could not replicate at scale. Every component showed precision machining to tolerances that required specialized equipment. Yet the design incorporated no hand-fitting. Any part from any M2 would interchange with any other M2. This interchangeability extended to ammunition feeding, barrel changing, and maintenance procedures. An Italian armourer familiar with the weapon could perform complete maintenance in field conditions with basic tools. The barrel featured a heavy profile that allowed sustained fire without the rapid deterioration Italian weapons experienced. The chrome-lined bore resisted wear from the hot propellant gases. When Romano's team test-fired the captured weapon, using captured American ammunition, it functioned flawlessly through 500 continuous rounds. They changed the barrel, following the procedure documented in a captured manual, completing the process in under 40 seconds. The replacement barrel required no adjustment or zeroing. They resumed firing. The weapon continued functioning through 2,000 rounds before Romano ordered the test stopped to conserve ammunition. During this firing, the M2 experienced 0 malfunctions, 0 jams, 0 failures to feed, fire, or extract. The gun crew consisted of Italian soldiers who had never seen an M2 before the test began. Following the English language manual using a translator, they operated the weapons successfully after less than 1 hour of familiarization. Romano compared this performance to Italian weapons. A Breda Modello 30, under ideal conditions with a trained crew and careful maintenance, might fire 500 rounds before experiencing a malfunction. The Breda Modello 37 performed better, but still required frequent stoppages to clear the feeding system and manage heat buildup. Neither Italian weapon could sustain the continuous fire the M2 demonstrated. The ammunition represented another revelation. The .50 BMG cartridge used brass cases of exceptional quality. The propellant burned cleanly, leaving minimal residue. The primers were reliable. The bullets were precisely manufactured, contributing to the weapon's accuracy. Romano's team examined 50 captured rounds in detail. They found no defects. Manufacturing quality was consistent across, in different production lots from different manufacturers. This consistency indicated production quality control that exceeded anything in Italian ammunition plants. Romano knew Italian ammunition quality varied significantly between lots. Some Breda ammunition required the internal oiling system to function reliably. Other lots worked adequately without oiling. The inconsistency meant Italian machine gun crews could never fully trust their ammunition supply. American ammunition worked. Every time. Consistently. The psychological impact of this reliability on Italian soldiers who examined the captured weapons proved significant. Corporal Franco Bianchi, assigned to Romano's technical team as a Breda gunner, participated in the test firing. After firing the M2, he was asked his opinion. His response was recorded in Romano's report. "This weapon fires like a drill. You load, you aim, you press the trigger, and bullets go exactly where you point. It does not jam. It does not stop. It fires until you release the trigger or the ammunition ends. Our Breda stops constantly. We spend more time clearing jams than firing. This gun just works. If I had this weapon instead of the Breda, I would feel like I could fight 10 men alone." Romano's report continued with analysis of the industrial implications. The M2's construction required specialized machine tools, advanced metallurgy, and quality control systems that Italian factories did not possess. More critically, even if Italian industry could build one M2, they could not build thousands. American production capacity allowed manufacturing these sophisticated weapons in quantities that exceeded Italy's total annual production of all machine gun types. Romano estimated, based on the weapons encountered in Tunisia, that American forces possessed M2s at a ratio of approximately 1 per 50 men. This meant every American battalion had dozens of these weapons. The ammunition expenditure this implied was staggering. Each M2 in action likely fired thousands of rounds per engagement. Resupplying this consumption required manufacturing capacity and logistics systems operating at scales Italian industry could not approach. The examination extended to comparing the M2 with captured examples of other Allied weapons. British Vickers machine guns, while reliable and effective, showed their World War I origins. The design was solid but reflected earlier manufacturing techniques. The Bren gun was excellent within its weight class but fired a less powerful cartridge. The M2 represented a different category entirely. It combined the hitting power of a heavy machine gun with reliability previously seen only in smaller weapons, and it was produced in numbers that suggested unlimited industrial capacity. German ordnance officers examining the same captured weapons reached similar conclusions. A joint German-Italian technical conference in Tunis on January 23, 1943, included discussion of the M2. German officers noted that while their MG-34 and MG-42 machine guns matched or exceeded the M2's rate of fire, German production could not match American output. More significantly, German logistics could not sustain the ammunition consumption American tactics employed. The MG-42, firing at rates approaching 1,200 rounds per minute, could exhaust its ammunition supply in minutes. American M2 crews seemingly never ran short of ammunition. One German ordnance major, speaking candidly after the formal conference ended, summarized the situation bluntly. "We Germans can build excellent weapons. Our machine guns are superb. But we cannot build them in the numbers the Americans build theirs, and we cannot supply them with ammunition as the Americans do. The Americans have created a system where the weapon, the ammunition, the logistics, and the industrial base all function together perfectly. We have excellent weapons attached to an industrial base that cannot sustain them. The Italians have an industrial base that cannot even build excellent weapons." The statement was harsh but reflected reality Italian officers could not deny. News of the captured M2s and their performance spread through Italian units in Tunisia. Soldiers who had encountered American fire and survived told stories that grew with retelling. The American machine guns that never stopped firing, the ammunition that never ran out, the fire that penetrated any cover. These stories, combining accurate observation with combat stress and rumor, created a psychological impact that exceeded the weapon's actual capabilities. Italian soldiers began assuming any position held by Americans possessed unlimited firepower. This assumption affected tactical decisions. Units that might have attempted to assault British positions avoided engaging Americans if possible. When engagement was unavoidable, Italian infantry often chose to surrender rather than face sustained American machine gun fire. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. German commanders noted this declining Italian morale with concern. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Axis forces in Tunisia, wrote in his diary in February 1943 that Italian units were becoming increasingly unreliable when facing American forces. The material disparity between Italian equipment and American weapons contributed significantly to this morale problem. Rommel requested that Italian units be re-equipped with German weapons where possible, but German production could barely supply German forces, let alone Italian allies. The industrial mathematics of the North African campaign were inexorable. American monthly production of machine guns exceeded total Axis production. American ammunition output dwarfed Axis capacity. American logistics delivered this material to frontline units with efficiency that German and Italian supply systems could not match. The firepower disparity manifested in every engagement. An American infantry company, fully equipped, possessed more automatic weapons than an Italian battalion. The American company could sustain higher rates of fire for longer periods, supplied by logistics chains that rarely failed. Italian units attacking American positions found themselves unable to suppress defensive fire long enough to close and assault. Italian units defending against American attacks found their return fire inadequate to stop American advances. The Kasserine Pass offensive in mid-February 1943 provided temporary Axis success against inexperienced American units. German forces, not Italian, conducted the main attacks. When American forces recovered and counterattacked, supported by armor and artillery, Axis gains evaporated. Italian units involved in the offensive suffered heavy casualties during the withdrawal. March 1943 saw the 8th Army attacking the Mareth Line from the east while American forces pressed from the west. Italian units, squeezed between converging Allied armies, faced deteriorating supply situations. Ammunition for Breda machine guns became increasingly scarce. Food rations diminished. Medical supplies ran short. German units received priority for the limited supplies reaching Tunisia by sea and air. Italian soldiers watched American positions, where supply trucks arrived regularly, and understood they were fighting an enemy who would never run short of bullets. The psychological weight of this realization proved devastating. Sergeant Antonio Ricci, a Breda gunner with the Trieste Division, was captured in early April 1943. During interrogation, he spoke about his experiences fighting Americans. His statement, preserved in Allied intelligence files, captured the despair Italian soldiers felt. "We knew the British had more supplies than we did, but we could see their limits. Sometimes their attacks stopped because they ran short of something. The Americans never stop. They fire all day and all night. We shoot 10 bullets, they shoot 1,000. Our guns jam constantly, theirs never jam. We have no ammunition, no food, no medicine. They have everything. How can we fight this? They do not just have better weapons, they have more of everything. Infinite ammunition, infinite supplies. We are soldiers trying to fight a factory. By April 1943, Axis forces in Tunisia were compressed into a small perimeter around Tunis and Bizerte. Supply by sea had become suicidal as Allied air and naval forces controlled the waters between Sicily and Tunisia. Air supply was inadequate for the 250,000 Axis troops trapped. Ammunition stocks dwindled. Food rations were cut repeatedly. Italian units, already short of equipment, found themselves unable to sustain defensive fires. American and British forces pressed from all sides, supported by overwhelming artillery and air power. Their machine guns fired continuously, ammunition never depleting. The final Axis collapse came in early May 1943. Italian units, starving and out of ammunition, surrendered en masse. Over 100,000 Italian soldiers entered prisoner of war camps. German forces fought slightly longer, but faced the same inevitable mathematics of supply exhaustion versus unlimited Allied resources. On May 13, 1943, all Axis resistance in North Africa ended. The captured Italian soldiers who entered Allied prisoner camps brought with them vivid memories of the weapons that had defeated them. In particular, they remembered the sound of American machine guns, that continuous mechanical roar that seemed to represent unlimited industrial power, translated directly into unlimited firepower. Allied intelligence officers interviewing Italian prisoners noted a common theme. Italian soldiers expressed shock not merely at American weapon quality but at the quantities involved. They had expected Americans to be wealthy and well supplied. They had not expected the scale of material abundance American forces demonstrated. One Italian officer, interviewed at a prisoner camp in Algeria, attempted to explain what he had witnessed. "We thought we understood modern war. We thought it was about soldiers and tactics and courage. Then we fought the Americans and learned modern war is about factories and production and logistics. The Americans do not send their best soldiers to fight us. They send their factories. Their factories build infinite guns that never break and infinite bullets that never miss. How does a soldier fight a factory? We cannot. We lose because before the first shot is fired, their industry has already defeated our industry." This realization, spreading through prisoner camps and later through Italy itself, as prisoners were exchanged or escaped, contributed to the erosion of Italian will to continue the war. The material disparity between Italy and America was not secret. Italian leaders had known before the war that American industrial capacity exceeded Italian capacity. What they had not fully appreciated was how this industrial disparity would translate into battlefield outcomes. The M2 Browning machine gun became a symbol of this disparity precisely because it demonstrated the connection so clearly. The weapon itself was superb, but more importantly, it was produced in quantities that Italian industry could never match, supplied with ammunition Italian logistics could never deliver, and employed by forces whose material abundance seemed limitless. Italian ordnance officers studying captured American equipment in early 1943 understood they were examining not merely weapons, but symptoms of a larger systemic failure. Major Romano's final report on the M2 Browning, submitted in March 1943, concluded with an assessment that went beyond technical specifications. He wrote that the fundamental problem was not that Italian weapons were inferior, though they were. The fundamental problem was that Italian industrial capacity could not support modern warfare against opponents whose industrial bases were orders of magnitude larger. Romano calculated that American production of M2 machine guns in 1942 alone exceeded total Italian production of all machine gun types from 1940 through 1943. American production was accelerating while Italian production, strained by material shortages and Allied bombing, was declining. The inevitable outcome was mathematical. Italian forces would face increasing numbers of weapons they could not match, supplied with ammunition quantities they could not approach, supported by logistics systems they could not disrupt. Courage and tactical skill could not overcome this disparity. The war was being decided in factories in Detroit and Saginaw, not on battlefields in Tunisia. Romano's report reached Rome but generated no response. Italian leadership, by mid-1943, understood they had entered a war they could not win. The question was not whether Italy would be defeated, but when and under what terms. The examination of captured M2 Browning machine guns in Tunisia represented a small footnote to this larger strategic reality. Yet, for the Italian soldiers who had faced these weapons in combat, the experience proved unforgettable. They had encountered not merely superior equipment, but a demonstration of industrial power that made their own efforts seem futile. The sound of M2 machine guns firing continuously would haunt their memories as the sound of inevitable defeat. The surrender of Axis forces in North Africa on May 13, 1943, marked more than a tactical defeat. For Italy, it represented the moment when the mathematical inevitability of industrial warfare became undeniable. Over 130,000 Italian soldiers entered Allied captivity in Tunisia. They joined thousands more captured during earlier phases of the North African campaign. These prisoners carried with them experiences that would reshape Italian understanding of modern warfare and their place within it. The Allied prisoner of war camps in North Africa, and later in the United States, became unexpected classrooms where Italian soldiers confronted the full scale of American industrial capacity. Prisoners transported to camps in the United States witnessed firsthand the abundance that had produced the weapons they had faced. The camps themselves, though prisoner facilities, offered food, medical care, and living conditions superior to what many Italian soldiers had experienced in their own army. The contrast proved psychologically devastating. Sergeant Mario Ferrara, captured in Tunisia in April 1943, was transported to a POW camp in Texas in July. His letters home, heavily censored but preserved in Italian archives, described his shock at American abundance. The guards carry rifles that seem new from the factory. They waste food that would feed a squad for a week. The trucks bringing supplies never stop coming. We asked how America could afford to keep so many prisoners in such conditions while fighting a war. They laughed and said this costs nothing. They said America produces more than it can use. I finally understand why we lost. We were trying to fight people who consider abundance normal. This understanding spread through the prisoner population as Italians compared experiences. Soldiers from different units, different battles, different time periods discovered common themes. The American weapons had always worked. The American ammunition had never run short. The American supplies had always arrived. Italian veterans of the Eastern Front, captured later in the war and mixed with North African prisoners, reported similar experiences against Soviet forces. Soviet industrial capacity, while less sophisticated than American, operated at similar scales. The Italians had entered a war where both major enemies could produce war materiel in quantities that made Italian industrial output irrelevant. The Italian government, facing military collapse on multiple fronts by summer 1943, could not ignore these realities. Internal Italian military assessments from mid-1943 acknowledged that continuing the war was pointless. Italy lacked the industrial base to produce weapons competitive with Allied equipment. Even if Italian factories could somehow match Allied quality, they could not match Allied quantity. The mathematics were stark and undeniable. American monthly production of a single weapon type like the M2 Browning exceeded Italian annual production of comparable weapons. This disparity existed across every category of military equipment: tanks, aircraft, artillery, vehicles, small arms. In every category, the production gap had widened as the war continued. Allied strategic bombing of Italian industrial targets accelerated this decline. The Caproni aircraft factory in Milan, bombed repeatedly in 1943, saw production collapse. The Breda works in Brescia, manufacturing machine guns and other small arms, experienced similar destruction. Italian repair and maintenance capabilities degraded as spare parts became unavailable. Italian units in the field operated weapons that were increasingly worn and unreliable, with no prospect of replacement. The material situation had become so desperate that Italian units were cannibalizing disabled vehicles and weapons to keep a fraction of their equipment operational. The Allied invasion of Sicily on July 10, 1943, demonstrated once again the futility of Italian resistance against opponents with unlimited material resources. Italian coastal divisions, under-equipped and poorly supplied, collapsed within days. German units fought more effectively, but could not prevent Allied conquest of the island. Italian casualties exceeded 30,000. Equipment losses were catastrophic. On July 25, 1943, the Italian Fascist Grand Council voted to remove Benito Mussolini from power. King Victor Emmanuel III ordered Mussolini arrested. The new Italian government, led by Marshal Pietro Badoglio, immediately began secret negotiations with the Allies for an armistice. The Italian armistice, announced on September 8, 1943, officially ended Italian participation in the Axis alliance. German forces in Italy immediately moved to disarm Italian units and occupy the country. The Italian military, already demoralized and equipment-starved, largely collapsed. Some units fought German attempts to disarm them. Many more surrendered without resistance. Thousands of Italian soldiers simply went home. The Royal Italian Army, which had numbered over 2 million men at the war's peak, effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. The experience of Italian soldiers during the brief period of co-belligerence with the Allies from September 1943 onward provided final confirmation of the equipment disparity that had contributed to Italian defeat. Italian units that joined Allied forces were gradually re-equipped with British and American weapons. Italian soldiers who had struggled with Breda machine guns received Bren guns or, in some cases, American Browning M1919s. Their reaction to these weapons was universally positive. A contemporary report by British liaison officers noted that Italian soldiers re-equipped with Allied weapons showed markedly improved morale and combat effectiveness. The report concluded that much of the poor Italian military performance earlier in the war could be attributed to inadequate equipment rather than insufficient courage or skill. This conclusion, while charitable, oversimplified the complex factors contributing to Italian military failure. Training, leadership, doctrine, logistics, and morale all played significant roles. However, the equipment disparity remained undeniable. Italian industry had proven incapable of producing weapons in the quantity and quality required for modern industrial warfare. This failure reflected deeper structural problems in Italian economy and society that military defeat merely exposed rather than created. The post-war analysis of Italian military performance focused extensively on the equipment question. Italian military historians, examining the causes of defeat, could not avoid confronting the industrial dimension. General Giovanni Messe, who commanded Italian forces in Tunisia and later co-belligerent forces, wrote in his memoirs that Italian soldiers had fought as well as equipment and supply allowed. The problem, he argued, was that Italian industry could not supply them adequately. Messe specifically mentioned the contrast between Italian machine guns and American Brownings as emblematic of the larger industrial gap. He noted that Italian ordnance officers had been fully aware of this gap by early 1943, but could do nothing to address it. The M2 Browning, meanwhile, continued its combat service long after Italian forces left the war. American forces employed M2s through the Italian campaign of 1943 through 1945. The weapons proved equally effective against German positions as they had against Italian defences. German soldiers, while better equipped than Italians, still could not match American firepower density. The M2's combination of range, hitting power, reliability, and quantity created tactical advantages that German tactical skill could only partially counter. The weapon served in the Pacific theatre with similar effectiveness. Japanese forces, like Italians, found themselves unable to sustain fire against American machine gun positions. The M2's ability to penetrate jungle vegetation and destroy light fortifications proved devastating against Japanese defensive tactics. In the island-hopping campaigns from 1943 through 1945, M2s provided crucial fire support for American advances against heavily fortified Japanese positions. The Korean War saw continued M2 employment. The weapons, many produced during World War II, remained in service and functioned reliably. Chinese and North Korean forces, equipped primarily with Soviet weapons, faced similar firepower disparities to those that had confronted Italian forces a decade earlier. The M2's sustained fire capability proved particularly valuable in defensive positions against Chinese human wave attacks. American forces in Vietnam employed M2s extensively. The weapon's heavy bullet proved effective against vegetation and light structures. The reliability that had impressed Italian ordnance officers in 1943 remained unchanged decades later. M2s fired in Vietnamese rice paddies and jungles with the same mechanical consistency they had demonstrated in North African deserts. The weapon remains in American service today, over a century after its initial design. Modern M2 variants incorporate minor improvements, but retain the fundamental design John Browning created. This longevity speaks to the original design's soundness and to the manufacturing quality that impressed Italian engineers in 1943. The ability to produce a weapon in 1933 that remains effective in 2025 reflects engineering excellence and industrial sophistication that Italian factories of the World War II era could not match. The Italian military, rebuilt after World War II as part of NATO, eventually equipped itself with modern weapons comparable to those of its allies. Italian industry, recovering from wartime destruction and integrated into the broader European and Atlantic economic systems, developed the capacity to produce sophisticated military equipment. Modern Italian firearms manufacturers like Beretta produce weapons used by military and police forces worldwide. This post-war industrial development demonstrated that Italian technological and manufacturing capability had always existed. The problem during World War II had been scale, resources, and industrial organization rather than fundamental inability. The legacy of the Italian experience facing American weapons in World War II influenced Italian post-war military thinking in several ways. Italian military doctrine emphasized the importance of equipment quality and adequate supply. Never again would Italian forces be expected to fight a major war with inadequate industrial support. Italy's NATO membership ensured access to alliance weapons and ammunition stocks, preventing the isolation that had left Italian forces in World War II dependent on inadequate domestic production. Italian military officers studied the North African campaign extensively as a case study in the importance of industrial capacity to modern warfare. The examination of captured M2 Brownings in Tunisia became a standard example taught at Italian military academies to illustrate how industrial disparity translates into battlefield outcomes. For the Italian soldiers who had actually faced M2 fire in combat, the memory remained vivid decades after the war. Veterans interviewed in the 1970s and 80s consistently recalled the sound and impact of American machine guns. Many described the experience as facing an unstoppable force. The continuous fire that never seemed to exhaust its ammunition represented in their memory the larger experience of fighting an enemy with unlimited resources. These veterans understood that their defeat had been inevitable from the moment Italy entered the war. The industrial capacity gap was too large to bridge through courage or tactical skill. They had been soldiers ordered to fight factories, and soldiers cannot defeat factories. The broader historical significance of the Italian encounter with American weapons in North Africa lies in what it revealed about the nature of World War II. The war was fundamentally an industrial conflict where production capacity determined outcomes more than any other single factor. Military skill, tactical innovation, and soldier courage all mattered, but they mattered within constraints set by industrial capacity. Armies equipped with adequate weapons and unlimited ammunition defeated armies equipped with inadequate weapons and limited ammunition, regardless of other factors. The mathematics of production determined the mathematics of battlefield outcomes. The M2 Browning machine gun's role in this story was symbolic as much as practical. The weapon itself was excellent. But what made it truly devastating to opponents was not merely its specifications, but the industrial system that produced it in unlimited quantities. supplied it with endless ammunition, maintained it with available spare parts, and employed it within logistics networks that never failed. Italian soldiers facing M2 fire confronted not just a weapon, but an entire industrial civilization dedicated to warfare at scales Italian society could not approach. The final irony of the Italian experience with captured M2s lies in what Italian ordnance officers learned from examining the weapons. They discovered that American weapons were not mysterious or impossible to understand. The M2 was well designed and superbly manufactured, but it incorporated no revolutionary technologies. Italian engineers could have designed similar weapons. Italian factories, with adequate resources and time, could have manufactured them. What Italian industry could not do was produce them in the quantities required while simultaneously producing all the other weapons, vehicles, aircraft, ships, and ammunition modern warfare demanded. The gap was not technological but industrial. Italy had entered a total industrial war with an industrial base adequate for a limited regional conflict. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.